and welcome to Human Tech, a podcast about the intersection between humans and technology. Before we start, I just want to send a quick reminder to everyone that if you like our podcast, you should like it on iTunes or share it with all your friends or tweet at us. I just want to get that disclaimer out of the way. Today, we have a very special podcast because we have a wonderful guest with us today, Nathalie Nahai, web psychologist and author. Hello, Nathalie.
Hello, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. We also have Susan with us, of course, as always.
Hey there.
Hey, before we start, again, if anyone wants to tweet at you, what are your guys' Twitter handles?
Well, mine is at the Brain Lady.
And mine's at Nathalie Nahai.
Okay, perfect. Nathalie, why don't you say hi and who are you? What do you like to do?
Who the heck are you?
Who are you here?
Going with the nice, easy questions. So I'm very interested in how our behaviors are shaped by our environments, specifically our online environments. And I'm interested in psychology and also the arts and the sciences. I'm generally quite a curious person. And so anything that speaks to the human condition and how we express ourselves and experience life is something that's going to be interesting to me. That's very broad.
Sounds like a fascinating podcast already, and we haven't even started.
All right, now, Nathalie, I'm trying to remember where we met. Now, I maybe I could back it up. I know that we spoke, we were on a panel together. We both spoke at the same session at South by Southwest last March.
That was a lot of fun. You were amazing.
It was a lot of fun. It was, there were four of us, so we had like 10 minutes each. So it was like really compressed, talking. Yeah. But now I'm trying to remember, but that was not the first time that we were together.
It was that event in Brighton, and we had that amazing dinner.
Brighton.
That's what it was. And it was just, do you remember there was that amazing chef, and we had a speaker's dinner, and it was in a loft somewhere in Brighton, and they made the most extraordinary food. And I remember we bonded over the canapes.
So let me just give the audience a little backstory. What was it? 2 years ago now? 2 summers ago?
Something like that.
Susan went on a bit of a work tour, I guess you could say, almost like a band. And she kind of she did like city to city in the United Kingdom in a bunch of different spots. And one of the places she went was Brighton, which is for Brighton UX, I believe, was the group, if I'm not mistaken.
They did a conference specifically. Their conference theme that year was specifically, I don't know exactly how they called it, but it basically was, web psychology. And I remember, thanks for reminding me, because now as soon as you said that, all these memories came back. Because I arrived in Brighton in the UK, which I had never been to. Which is by the water, by the sea, and then all I had was this address. So I hadn't met, I got there by train from London. I have this address where I'm supposed to go for dinner, right? For all the speakers are going to meet for dinner, and I'm walking down this very dark street in a little tiny alleyway, which Brighton is, I think, known for. And I'm using GPS on my phone, and it's like I can't find the place, except my GPS keeps showing me that you just passed it, and I'm like, I didn't pass anything, and so I just kept like backing up, and what was in front of me was just like a door, just a door, no sign, no anything.
This is terrifying.
And I knock on the door, and nobody answers the door. And I turn the handle, it's like in a movie, and it's open, and I open it. And of course, it doesn't open to anything. It opens to a stairway. So I still don't know if this is the right place, but I hear voices. So I think I'm either at the right place, I'm going to walk up the stairs to the dinner, or I'm breaking and entering into someone's home, And I didn't know it, and I walked up, and that was it. And it was this great big space with all these crazy British people, and and this enormous kitchen. And there was this, like a professional chef and his assistant, or one or two assistants, and he's cooking right there in front of us, right? And one of the most amazing meals I've ever had.
That was
So
a
it
stellar
was great.
evening.
There were like a dozen of us. Yeah. And Natalie, you and I got talking about the stuff, we love to talk about, which is psychology and online behavior. And I think we were pretty much ignoring most of the other people in the room. We were just talking for like 2 hours. That was very fun. And that was a great conference. So any of you listening that, have you ever been back to speak there?
I don't know if I have. I've had a lot of friends who've spoken there. It's still going really strong. It attracts a really good caliber of speakers. But in Brighton, there's quite a few fantastic conferences. There's another one called Brighton SEO, which is also really good. And I know that everyone kind of knows each other. So, yeah.
Yeah, that was a great trip. And then, so when we were talking, when we met again at South by Southwest last March, I believe it was when we hatched this idea. Now about you coming on the podcast, and I know, there's so many things we could talk about. I would like to talk to you. When we met at South by Southwest, we were talking about the fact that we should talk about the ethics of using the psychology of persuasion to get people to take action, which is, that's a lot of what we both end up talking about, whether we mean to or not, because you and I are talking about psychology and what makes people do stuff, especially online. So can we just talk about that for a minute? Because I've been dying to have this conversation with you. So, the basic question is, right? I'll pose the basic question and you can tell me whether you even agree with that question. And Guthrie, with Natalie and I talking together, it's going to be, you can try and jump in, just try, just
sure.
push your way in.
I'll ask pertinent, relevant questions when the time comes.
So, whenever I, like you and I are both authors, we write books about, why people do this or why people do that online. And then, we also write and talk about, okay, so if you want people to press the button and buy your product or sign up or whatever it is, what can you do to make it more likely that people will take that action, right? As psychologists, we know some about that. But then the flip question is, should we be doing this? And this is okay. Is this okay to get people to take action? And is there a line somewhere where, on one side of the line, absolutely, it's okay to encourage people by the way you're designing, by the way you're designing your product or your page or your, message on Twitter. By the way you're designing it, you're encouraging them to sign up or buy, and sure, that's okay. Isn't that what marketing and advertising is all about? But is there a point at which, no, it's actually, becomes questionable, or a point at which it's absolutely not okay to use what we know about behavior and design to get people to take a certain action? And, so is there a line?
It's such a good place to start, isn't it? I think there is a line. I think the line depends on the people who are involved. But I think broadly speaking, I would draw the line at saying if someone or some brand or any entity is trying to coerce you into taking a decision or taking an action that you don't want to take, then that counts as manipulation. And that's the point at which you should step back and go, okay, actually, where's my agency? What's in it for them? Why am I being coerced in this particular way? And that line will be very different for very different people. So, for instance, if someone's trying to get you to buy a specific product and they're trying to get me to buy the specific product and you really love it and I actually really don't like it, and they're using the same technique, our subjective experiences of whether that technique is okay or not will be based on the fact that we either want to interact with that brand or not, and whether we feel like we're being moved in a direction that we want to or not want to be moved in. My English is going a bit out the window there, but basically it's a question of, are you creating a frictionless experience that helps someone achieve their goals, or are you taking someone down a path against their will towards a goal that is not going to serve both parties? And so it's about mutual benefit versus one-sided benefit.
That's interesting. All right, I'm gonna give you a hard time.
Go for it, please.
Just for fun. But it's interesting what you say, because all right, here's a couple of avenues on what you said that I want to explore with you. One is you I think you're implying conscious knowledge, and
Yeah.
we know that most behavior of any kind, and certainly most behavior if you're talking about signing up, registering, buying, is deeply influenced by unconscious motivations and unconscious knowledge. So, would people even know whether they wanted something or not? Would they even know whether it was good for them or not? So I want to explore that part. And then the second part I want to explore is that you are this idea that it might be it might have crossed an ethical line for me, but not for you, or vice versa, based on how we feel about the product or service, or how it fits in our lives. But then, if that's true, then how can anyone design something and know that they're doing ethical design? And then the third thing I'm going to see, I should have written these down. Hopefully I'll remember them all. The third thing is that it's interesting that you're applying kind of an intentionality to it. And I say that because I've done some expert witness work for in the U.S. Here we have the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, which part of what they do is make sure that there are the websites that are trying to rip you off, are trying to get you to purchase the gold and silver, and hidden in that contract that you didn't read is the fact that they now have permission to make all these other trades and access money in your account that you don't even realize you're doing. That when they go after those kind of scam artists, they actually have told me, as I've been working with them, that they are not, they never try and prove intentionality, that the intention of the designer or the website owner is irrelevant to whether or not they'll win their case, that it's not based on this company was trying to defraud you. It's just whether or not the design resulted in you taking action that you weren't aware of. So, just a little light question for you, Nathalie. Which of those three do you want to tackle first?
Well, I'm really, really fascinated by the last one that you're talking about, in terms of when these companies get sued or when they get into legal hotspots, that intentionality isn't something that gets considered. I think that's absolutely fascinating, because if you're talking about the legality of certain things, or the moral component of certain things, and whether it can be prosecuted or not, and the fact that you can only prosecute someone if they've achieved their goal, that's a really interesting way of thinking.
And it's not even whether they've achieved their goal, because what they're saying, what the FTC is saying, is the goal doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether they were trying. Yeah, I found when they first told me that on the first case I worked with them on, I was like, what?
It's fascinating.
Because I felt like I mean, and it was so interesting about what some of these designs would do. So like they would have this a checkbox, right? And if you check the checkbox, it means that they can do all these things later on, right? I mean, they can access your money or whatever it was, right? And they would bring up the form with the checkbox and then pop a window up on top of it, and so that you didn't see it, right?
Wow.
And then when you responded to the window, the form behind it would then disappear. And of course, the checkbox had been defaulted with a check in it. So,
Wow.
it's obvious to me. It's like,
Mm.
well, they're doing this on purpose, but and they were like, well, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether they doing it on purpose. And we can't, here are the things we're trying to prove. And intentionality is never one of them. I don't know if it's because they can't win at that or it's not part of the law. I actually probably should have delved a little further into that. Yeah, so that's over here in the U.S. and I don't know, what do you know what your laws over there are like around this?
Well, I know that in the Netherlands, Booking.com, which is a big like holiday and hotel booking website that compares different options, that they use a huge number of psychological persuasion principles, including things like scarcity, social proof, all of this sort of stuff. And they got into some hot water a couple of years ago with the Dutch government because they were seen to be taking too many of these persuasion principles and trying to coerce people into specific directions. And so I don't know as to the details of whether it was the intentionality, but the Dutch government basically ended up restricting how much they were able to use on their website to increase sales. So I think it definitely is country and culture specific. And the point that you're making, which is such an interesting point, and obviously we have to talk about this, is that most of the decisions that we make unthinkingly. We don't do it with a huge amount of deliberative effort. So it's not a conscious choice that we're going to sit there and we're going to think through every single item that we're going to buy on Amazon or whatever it is. So then the question that opens up from that is, well, where does the responsibility lie? And we kind of push it around a bit. And the consumer says, well, the responsibility is not on me. I can't possibly be expected to read 58 pages of terms and conditions. And then the organization says, well, it's not on us because, we're only working within the law. Look at the legal aspect. And then the legal aspect kind of goes, well, it's too fast moving. We couldn't possibly tell you what to include and what not to include. We're doing the best that we can. And so it ends up getting shuffled around from pillar to post. And I think the answer really, if it's going to be anywhere, is in having kind of a more collaborative approach on what is and isn't ethical at the very bottom line. And for that to happen, there needs to be an honest discussion about the practices that people are using and how that affects, customer relationships, how that impinges people's freedom, whether people feel that they're being lied to and where you might draw that line. So I think because it's such a thorny and complex issue, it's very difficult to untangle.
Can I play the role of the contrarian now?
Sure. Yeah.
So what's the problem? Have you ever eaten bacon or ice cream or something that's just delicious?
Yes, I would say that.
I had both of those things today, so yes.
It's not fair. It's a totally legal thing that our body just completely loves. And we are biologically just driven to enjoy and like and seek out these certain things.
Calorie-rich foods, for instance.
So we're doing all this. We're running around on whim anyways with everything that we purchase and the decisions that we make. Are they really our decisions? Not really. So what does it matter if you get some advertisements that are fraud inducing and it's.
I think your career with the FTC is over before it begins.
Okay, but okay, so I just want to draw a line in the sand, I suppose, because I think in my head there are two things at issue. There is trying to commit fraud, which is the art form of making someone accept like a legally binding, maybe that's not the right word, basically that you're trying to make someone make a decision that must be made from a legal perspective, must be made consciously, like signing a contract, right? In order to have a valid contract, you have to have the consent of a party, and it has to actually be right, like the party has to be aware of the consent that they're giving.
So Natalie, just to interject here, Guthrie has a law degree.
Ah, okay, right. I was wondering. I was like, this sounds very well informed.
Versus, yeah, exactly. So versus simply, what you could call, I guess the classic example would be the beer commercial where the bubbles in the ad are actually naked women, but you don't realize that the bubbles are naked women. It just kind of looks like the outline, and so then you are attracted to the beer, right? Which would be your classic, like, advertisers, kind of subconscious tricks of the trade to kind of get on your head versus like the classic FTC case, right, where click here to do whatever, and of course what you don't see is if you would have just scrolled, you would have said that you now owe them your firstborn child or whatever.
So Guthrie, you're saying that that there is no ethical line. The ethical line is the legal line. And so wherever the legal line is, that's the line.
Because I'm just trying to pinpoint what's at issue. What do people, what is it that people, because obviously we talk to a lot of people, and a very popular topic is the ethics of brain science. So I mean, a lot of the work we do happens to be in marketing and advertising and getting people's attention, and right, and you have an ad where all of a sudden something explodes, right? And so you look at the ad, right? That's a dirty little trick using our biological instincts to get, to grab our attention. And there's a lot of people think that there's a ethical line somewhere that should not be crossed. But that's like kind of like a trick to grab our attention versus committing fraud. Which seems, because it's one thing if you're more likely to purchase something or you're more likely to take an action, but it's still your action versus you're now legally obligated to, I've put you in an ad, you've already made the action. I don't know.
I think it falls along a spectrum, really. I suppose there's the point at which it becomes a legal obligation to be transparent with the client, and if you're not, or with the customer, and if you're not, then you end up in hot water, versus the grey area, which is, are you coercing people in a legal but subversive way where they're not necessarily aware that they're being coerced, and they later come to regret their decision. So for instance, if you look at dark patterns, bait and switch techniques where people feel like they're signing up to something and then they switch. Right. Well, ethically, that was in the grey for quite a while, until the UK, for instance, created a law which said that particular practice was not legal because it was duplicitous, and essentially they had to update things to reflect, new practices, so that it was no longer legal for people to trade in that way in the UK. So I think there is this notion of, when we talk about legality and we talk about ethics, the law reflects the ethics of the society at the time in which they're made. And it takes time for the law to catch up with common practice, and for the law to catch up with people's expectations around privacy and integrity and trade, essentially, what's fair trade and what's not. And that can vary quite substantially between one particular country and the next. So, yeah, I think there is definitely a grey area which makes it very difficult to categorically state where a line might be, because that line is constantly shifting.
And I think for when I get the ethics question, when I get it, it's usually after I've been talking about these unconscious decisions and the unconscious factors, and the idea that when something is scarce, then we value it more, or when so if I feel there's only 2 shoes left, it'll make it more likely that I'll buy the shoes, or so much of the stuff that I teach and talk about is unconscious, right? We are not aware that that these factors are influencing our behavior and making us want to sign up or make a purchase or make a particular decision. And so that's when people will usually say, hey, wait a minute, is this ethical? Because of the idea that we're trying to get someone to take an action. We're doing something to trigger an unconscious reaction that will definitely be in our favor, right? If you're the person trying to make the sale, and may or may not be in the person's favor if they, actually have a perfectly good refrigerator and they don't need a new refrigerator, right? And
let me get some lines in the sand then, just from both of you, just so we can determine where you personally stand on the issue. A movie theater is showing at all the movie theaters, all the movies that they show, during the movie, once every 20th frame, for just a trillionth of a second, they flash a picture of soda or candy, right? So that you go and purchase.
Yeah, you're talking about the subliminal advertising.
Now I know that stuff probably, they've done a lot of research. It kind of doesn't
Natalie,
work.
does it work, or do you know what the latest research is on that?
I know that for a minority of people, it can influence perception. There was a study that was done recently with, it was a campaign around politics, actually, in the States, and the anti-Democrat, the Republican campaign, had a flashing of image of the word Democrat on the screen, but where it focused on the word rats. And they subsequently did some tests to see the sentiments about the candidate in a rats variant versus a non-rats variant where it was absent. And they found that it did statistically, it was a significant, there was a significant impact, even though it was quite small. So I think, and this is one of the key things that I've kept coming up against, which is that in certain instances, yes, there is a statistically significant difference, but that tends to be very small and only for a minority of people. And it also tends not to be particularly long lasting. So when we're talking about being influenced or manipulated, I think most of the practices that we're talking about, if you've had a bad experience with a company because at a point of weakness, I don't know, like 11 o'clock at night after a couple of beers, you were seduced into buying a t-shirt that you didn't need because they had all these different persuasion principles on the screen. If you get caught out by that company again and again and again, eventually over time you'll associate them with, bad feelings, that they're not providing a good service, or that there's something that's untoward that's going on about them, and then you're likely to not want to shop with them anymore. So I think my sense is that a lot of the stuff that we cite and a lot of people's concerns are larger than are warranted. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be talking about ethics, because I think it's a basic respect for other humans that is sometimes lacking in the practices that we see employed by large businesses. So
fair enough. But let's just assume that it is effective enough that a company would definitely want to do it. We'll just make that as an assumption, even though it's not true.
So
for a large swath of people.
Your movie example?
Yes. Okay. Ethical or not ethical?
That they would show the picture of the soda and the...
Not ethical to the point in which it would need government intervention to step in and prohibit the behavior.
Oh, see, now you're basically talking about, is it something that one should make laws about? Yeah.
Yes. I'll back up. If you're opposed to the consumption of meat, right? If you're a vegan or vegetarian, you can be opposed to that and not purchase meat because you personally think it's unethical. But then there are certain things that rise to such a level that it has to, but it's another level to be like, no one should do this. Right. There's a personal preference, and if you don't like it, you just shop somewhere else. Right. That's the whole capitalism thing. But I'm talking about, when you're talking about ethics, right? Something that's so unethical that you'd advocate for it to be banned at a government level.
I think there's a difference here between the object and the process. So if the process of subliminal messaging were effective, and there's mixed evidence towards that effect. Right. But let's say, for argument's sake, that someone finds that a specific subconscious manipulation of behaviors is effective, and therefore you can use it for whatever you want. The question isn't what is it that you're using it to sell, whether that's guns or alcohol or meat or sex or lollipops or whatever it might be. The argument, I think, really is this process by which we're selling whatever given sort of topic or item or policy or whatever it might be, is the process actually undermining people's ability to make informed decisions? Is it violating a human right at some level? And if the question results in a yes, then I think it's the process that should be dismissed as opposed to the ability to talk about the object. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I like that answer.
Okay. This is very interesting. So let's go. So let's take the very specific example then of, let's assume that subliminal advertising is, let's say effective on, I'm just going to throw this out. It's effective on, it's fairly effective. It's effective on 70% of the people. Let's just say that. Okay. So if that were true, now we're in the movie theater, and they're going to do the subliminal messaging to get people to buy, more food and soda. So, I'll ask all three of us to answer this. Two questions. One, is it ethical then for them to do it? And two, Guthrie, these were your questions.
Yes.
Should we work on a law that would not let them do it?
Do you want me to go first?
Sure.
I think it is unethical for them to do it on a personal level, but I think it should be legal, but they must give notice. So I think the part of it that is inherently bad, that like our, we're all walking around with our little moral compass, and so you come across little things and you just kind of, you're like, yes, that's fair, oh no, that's wrong. And I think the part that people really don't like is the fact that they don't have control over it, that they're not even aware that it's happening. So I think I would just be like, this movie theater, you'd have to just give a warning to people, so at least they understood the risk that they were taking. And then if they don't want to, have that happen, then they can go to a different movie theater.
Susan, what do you think?
Yeah, it's so, first of all, I'm just fascinated by the whole question, and I was kind of interested in my own reaction because it surprised me, because my initial reaction is, that's not ethical. They shouldn't be doing it. Of course, and yet I know that it's like I'm a little concerned about my consulting project future, if I say that. I'm kind of surprised by my answer, but it feels like it's not ethical. And I guess legally, I don't know. I was waffling on the legal thing, except that then when Guthrie gave his answer, I kind of liked that one.
Yeah, I am, just as a personal note, I'm not a big fan of paternalistic government. So the heavy-handed, thou shall not do this. I'm fine with people making choices, just as long as they understand that their choices are, stupid. That's fine. Feel free to make the stupid for the person, right? The choices that they make are probably bad for them, but they're free. But they should be free to make those choices. That are not in their own best interest, so long as they understand that the choices they're making aren't in their best interest.
All right, now Natalie, what's your answer?
Oof.
It's really tough, isn't it?
It's a very tricky issue. So, well, like you, I think that a paternalistic legal structure is actually more constraining and therefore more damaging than it is liberating in many instances. I don't particularly trust authority. I think authority has to be earned, as does respect. And so I think that given my caveat around my own personal preferences, I do think that it's important that there should be laws around transparency about this kind of thing. However, I also think that there has to be, that if certain, and I think actually most of these practices are not so effective that we need these, but if there were to be a practice that was so effective that it were encouraging people who are more vulnerable or at risk, who were less able to ascertain the risks that specific decisions might pose them. So, for instance, the obesity crisis or whatever else it might be that then strains an entire nation's taxes, health systems, mortality rate, etc. If the severity of the risk was resulting from such practices being legal, I think at that point there is a case to be made about making such practices illegal. But I think that's a much more stark version of the picture that we'll ever witness in reality. I think also the other point to be made is that if you do make it a legal requirement that companies who employ such practices that have been found to be effective to disclose the practices that they're using, then market forces will come into their own and people will be able to select for organizations and businesses that don't use those specific practices. And I think this is something that we've seen happen in the organic food movement, in the B Corp movement, in fair trade movements. We're starting to see it in technology with people taking up ad blockers, tracking blockers, phones that might end up ensuring our privacy, taking blackout vacation, putting stickers over the cameras of technological devices. So I think there is that element of people becoming more literate about the threats that they're potentially exposed to, not only in the psychological side of things, but also in the technological side of things. And that's where I would be more interested to help inform people about what their decisions mean and how they can make decisions that will better suit them and their goals and their sense of empowerment.
Would you like to hear something terrifying?
Sure, why not? Who doesn't hear something terrifying?
Mark Zuckerberg, owner of Facebook.
Yeah.
He puts tape over there was a picture of him using his laptop, and he totally had tape over his laptop's webcam.
Yes, most of us have been doing this for years.
Yeah, well,
And being cited by everyone else as being paranoid. They're like, Matt,
I'm just saying.
4 years ago.
I'm sure he knows. If anyone knows about what's possible, it's him. So that should scare you all.
No, just inform you. Just you could even have. I had the pleasure of interviewing Nico Sell, who's the founder of Wicker, which is an end-to-end encrypted messaging service in the States. Although it's also a global service, but she's based out in California, I believe. And she was talking about how you can actually even create Faraday cages for your phones just by using a jiffy bag with a little bit of aluminium foil in it, just to create enough static charge to essentially cloak your device. So there are people who do this kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, they definitely sell all kinds of Faraday purses. It's definitely a thing.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
I have another example though.
Yeah, go ahead. And then I want to bring my. I've been setting you guys up this entire time.
Oh, come on.
So you make your point.
Wait a minute. Did you give us notice that you were setting us up?
No. It was a bait and switch to get you to draw firm positions in the sand before I gave you the twist.
No, go for it.
Well, do you want me to give you another example?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
do we find out how you've been manipulating us? All right.
Let's keep people on tenterhooks.
Speaking of Facebook, because that was my next question. So, if you recall,
yes,
I haven't said it yet.
I know exactly where you're going, and I think it's a great point.
I think about a year ago, Facebook ran a little experiment where they adjusted your feed, and so some people got a more positive feed. And some people got a more negative feed about, events. And they were trying to see if your state of well-being and your mood was affected by the feed that you were getting. And they ran this little experiment, and, you didn't know that they were running the experiment. So, was it ethical for them to run that experiment and try and affect your mood without you knowing that you were part of an experiment?
Great question. I think in instances like that where we're talking about ethics, not morals, and morals are something which are generally sort of systems that are handed down that are much more rigid in structure. If we're talking about ethics are malleable, and as such they're kind of determined by I would say, probably large minorities or a majority of a group that then determines what's ethical and what's not, based on the media reaction to the press release that they sent out. And they said, this is what we've been doing, isn't it amazing? Based on the backlash in the media and from the people who'd been using Facebook, I would say that it wasn't ethical. I think what's interesting from a legal perspective is that they completely covered their asses. I mean, there's a fantastic film that came out, it's at least 5 years ago now. I think it was in 2011. And it's called Terms and Conditions May Apply. And they looked at all the different terms and conditions that you find on some of the most popular sites in the world, including Facebook sites. And they talk about how when you sign up to it, and how when we have signed up to it in previous years, how the terms and conditions have changed to grant these businesses, Facebook in particular, but there are others, greater access to our data and greater powers to use the data in ways that they see fit and to change their platform in order to extract certain information from the people who are using it, including, for research purposes. The interesting thing is that their research clause is so broad that they can pretty much get away with anything without having to refer to an ethics committee, which is the kind of structure that psychological research tends to rely on and try to refine to avoid breaches of human rights or breaches of ethical conduct, or to avoid outcomes that might be harmful emotionally to the people who are involved in the experiment. When you look at corporations, they're not beholden to that same high standard of ethics, and I think that's incredibly problematic. And most people will value the utility and convenience of such platforms over the ethical and emotional repercussions that it might have when they use that platform. And these are some of these repercussions are not going to be seen for years down the line. And I think that's another problem, is that the outcomes of people engaging in these platforms, giving their data away, participating in covert experiments, which all sounds absolutely awful, but is essentially what's happening. The results of those sorts of contributions are not going to be felt until another 5-10 years, and by then you can't take it back because your profile is being created and your psychometric data is being sold, which is already happening.
I mean, but it's tough because, Facebook has made it very clear this is their service and it's their data, and it's, it's right, like, thanks for stopping by in our store. We can do what we want. This isn't, So I don't...
Yeah, they're not doing anything illegal. But I think as a consequence, as they've announced these things to the press, and as information has been leaked about how this information is being used, a lot more people now are much more passive users of Facebook. You're getting people who are lurking. You're getting people who are moving on to different, more fragmented platforms to achieve what Facebook does in its entirety, specifically because there is such a lack of trust in such a large organization. So I think it is going to suffer, and I think it already is suffering.
So I have some follow-up questions. So first of all, if you, and I'll ask this of both of you, if you were a consultant to Facebook, and you were in a meeting, and they said, "Hey, we have this idea we'd like you to help us with. We're thinking about running this experiment," the one that they ran. Would you say to them, "Wait, I'm not sure that's ethical," and first question is, would you bring up the ethical question as a consultant on a project like that? And two, the next question is, are you saying that basically we don't have to bring up the ethical question because the market will, there was a backlash, and the market will regulate this, and if companies do things that may not be considered ethical, it'll hurt them in the long
run. Guthrie, would you like to answer first, or would you like me to go?
You go first.
Yeah, as a consultant, I would not give my time to Facebook. I'm sorry, Facebook. There are some fantastic people that work there, and it's not to detract from the work that they're doing. I think there's a lot of fantastic brains, a lot of fantastic people who believe that they're working for a good cause. I personally, based on my own ethics, disagree with the covert nature the covert way in which they're approaching this research, I realize it's totally legal, but I have a serious problem with that. And that's actually the reason that I came off Facebook. I came off Facebook about 3 years ago because I completely disagreed with the way in which they were running their business. And it's not the kind of world that I want to live in. It's not the kind of world that if I had kids, I'd want them to live in. So I wouldn't give my services to a company that was conducting covert experimentation and that was then selling on psychometric data that could then be used to profile people based on age, ethnicity, sexuality, drug use, relationship status in a discriminatory fashion to then give people different, price plans on various products such as insurance. It's a very discriminatory. Potentially, the data could be used in a very discriminatory fashion, and I don't believe that that's fair. So that's my very hardline stance. It's one of the few hardline positions I have. But I do also think that market forces will adjust for this. I think they already are adjusting for this, and I think that that's potentially, although I don't know conclusively, of course, so this is just conjecture, I imagine that that's one of the reasons that Facebook are buying up so many smaller companies and moving into encrypted services, which doesn't allow them to extract as much data, but which allows them to retain a stronghold over people's interactions and communications online, because consumers want to be protected. Otherwise, why would we know that there's so much need and desire for encrypted services?
So, I mean, I guess the first thing, most big companies do all kinds of data mining. I mean,
yeah,
it's certainly not just Facebook. In Facebook's defense,
no, it's true.
It's any search engine of any type, any social media platform. I personally, for just chatting with my friends, I've switched to Telegram, which is a non-profit chat service run by a couple Russian billionaires who in Germany, and they don't do anything with your data, which seems nice. Just personally, but I still use Facebook. But I just understand that, it's like a Miranda warning. I don't think you guys have Miranda warnings well, they wouldn't be called that anyways in the UK, but it's the anything you say can and will be used against you.
Oh yeah.
So that's right. I think a lot of people they understand. I mean, the running joke with all of my friends, right, is that there's no, Google knows everything there is to know about me through the internet searches, but it's okay.
Well, you say that, but actually, when you're using Google searches, there are so many easy ways to stop trackers. So you can use ad block, you can use Guthrie, you can use a VPN, you can use Opera as your the browser of choice. There are so many very quick and easy and accessible hacks to minimize the amount of data that search engines can track about you. When you're talking about contributing self-generated content, whether that's qualitative stuff like comments or rich media, so videos and images, or even just binary stuff like likes, etc., that can reveal a huge amount of psychometric information. And the searches that you conduct on Google, if you've got your ad block enabled, etc., there's a lot less potentially, if you're using the services correctly, that they can figure out about you, because you're not contributing things in quite the same way.
Well, but here's the problem, is that it's really, really useful. I remember, we had typed in, so I had done, we were outside of Atlanta, and we needed to go to a place in Atlanta. So I had done a Google search for an address, okay, associated with my account. We were then driving to that place, okay? I have a Nexus phone, a Google Nexus running pure Android, so it's very Google experience. I wasn't getting turn-by-turn directions. I was not using Google Maps. I was not using any sort of Google anything. I wasn't using any location services at the moment, okay? But the GPS on my phone was on. And we were driving, but before we had left outside Atlanta, I had looked up on a computer the directions to the place, so I knew where we were going. So we're driving in this car, and without warning, I get a little alert from my phone saying there's been a traffic accident on the highway, and you should consider taking a different route. So I wasn't using it. Didn't know where I was going. It only knew because I had previously done a Google search, and it noticed that I was traveling in the direction of which I had previously done a Google search, even though I wasn't actually using Google Maps. And it sent a message to my phone that then saved me 20 minutes from being stuck in traffic. So it was really, really useful that they were mining everything I do and tracking my every move.
And useful and a little creepy.
Yeah.
Definitely creepy. Right. But I don't know how much you've used Google now, but it happens all the time. So like, it gets used to your habits. There was I used to go and visit a friend's house pretty consistently at like the same time. And before I'd even go, right, it'd be like a Tuesday, right? I'm headed to trivia. My little notice will come up and be like, if you want to get to trivia on time, you better leave in 5 minutes because there's traffic.
Really?
Yeah.
And you had not set up
Correct.
alerts.
See, I think that's
I'm using
a bit
Google now that gives
messed
you
up.
stuff. You can opt out of that, but it's not like I wasn't using Google Maps. I wasn't using like I didn't tell it that I was
You
going.
didn't tell it
it just knows.
alert me. Yeah,
Yes.
it just alerted you.
Yeah.
I think that the problem isn't with the technology. I think everyone has to make their own decisions about what serves them and what doesn't, and what's a fair or an unfair value exchange. And I think that will be incredibly personal. So I'm not about legislating that, but I think that as a default, we should be able to opt in to this sort of thing, not opt out. I think that's for me the key point is just you should be able to opt in.
I'm a huge pro-privacy guy. I worry about this stuff all the time, and I find myself opting in constantly because it's
good, but that's
so
okay. But
convenient.
Making the choice, but that's great, right? That's technology is at its best. Is you going, actually, I value the service. I trust the people who are selling this to me.
I don't trust them. It's just I'm sure they're using it for all kinds of horrible, nefarious purposes.
Well, and that and this.
At least that's your choice.
Yeah, well, and this. So when we were talking about the Facebook example, to me, this kind of goes background in this. We kind of go background in a circle because, again, there are these unconscious forces and motivations that are so powerful. So just Facebook as an example. They're doing even besides the whole issue of data mining, just that one little experiment of, trying to affect your mood, right? There's all this stuff is going on, and yet we want, this drive we have to connect socially, right, is so strong, or the drive we have to for things to be convenient, to not have to think about things, right? Just make things easy, right? System one, Daniel Kahneman's system one thinking. I just don't want to think about it. I just want it to be easy. I don't want to have to mess with things. This is how we operate. And so we'll overlook, all this other stuff, maybe not forever, but for a while, for a long while, because of these other unconscious instincts and drives and motivations that we have. And so that's, I don't know that, I don't think the way our brains work and the way we react to the environment, that it's realistic and maybe not even possible that we can intentionally choose all of this because we have these overwhelming drives and motivations to be social, to have sex.
So it's that's a perfect segue. Here was the twist that I was going to give to
Oh,
Melody.
good. There was yeah. How were you manipulating us?
So right, because I got you to make these ethical stances on these certain things, right? That if it was shown that it was effective to do this for a large swath of people, that, you know, and you didn't give them warning, it would be wrong in some way. Okay.
Yeah.
Are there Hardys or Carl's Jr. in the United Kingdom?
I don't know what that is.
Guess not. Hardee's is
It's a certain kind of fast food.
what would you say, the third largest fast food chain in the
Yeah, I
United States?
don't know.
Probably McDonald's, Subway,
I don't know.
Hardee's, perhaps. I'm sure they go by something in the United Kingdom. I'm sure they just have a different brand name.
Yeah.
They have an ad campaign they've been running for a couple years. Okay, and here's the ad campaign. You have a pure white background, usually. All right, and there is a gorgeous, scantily clad model, and she's holding a giant hamburger, very large. Okay, she sexily looks at the camera and takes a giant bite of the hamburger. And like barbecue sauce will drip down her chin, and she'll like sexually like wipe it off and like eat it. Okay. And then it gives like the tagline and the name of the burger they're selling. That's the ad. How is that different than like convincing people to go like you know, unconsciously go buy popcorn?
I think, well, the first thing to say is that even though it's playing on our sexuality and on our desire, which are very strong forces, you can physically see and consciously recall the images that are being shown to you.
Okay.
She does have a point.
So you're saying it's all about being able to observe what's happening.
I don't know if it's all about that, but I think that certainly plays an important part. Well, that would be the difference in that particular instance, is that, you know, you're being shown something which, you know, if someone said to you, "What did you see?" you would say, "Well, I saw a gorgeous, scantily clad model taking a massive bite of the burger," and thinking about it, of course, it's got sexual overtones. Where if you said to someone, "What did you see in your, you know, Star Trek Beyond trailer?" you'd say, "Well, it was just an advert for Ghostbusters. Did you notice the subliminal messaging?" "Well, no, I didn't, because it was subliminal." And, you know, it's a completely different, in that sense. You can't recall it consciously, so it does fall into a separate category, I believe.
So this panel that we've had has come to a conclusion that the morality and ethics in the modern era is simply is simply about transparency. That it's transparency that's actually the issue. It's understanding what's happening to your data, or what's happening in the messages that you're being sent, and the difference between ethical or unethical is the line that is determined is how much the end user is aware of what's happening.
I think that's a large part of it, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, that seems to be what we're saying. I think that the conversation is fascinating. I'm amazed that it's really the first time I've had this conversation. That's a little scary to me, considering how long I've been dealing with the psychology of online behavior, or just psychology in general. I'm really fascinated by the fact that, and something you said early on, Nathalie, in this conversation, which was, you know, that whether something is ethical or not, you know, that it depends. I think that I thought, and I don't even know that I thought, I didn't even realize I was thinking this way, that there would be like an answer, you know, that there was a line that you could describe, and if this is true and this is true and this is true, then, you know, you've crossed the line. And Guthrie, maybe you're saying there is a line. It has to do with awareness. But I also think, in addition to the awareness feature, I think we've established that that you have to talk about it and you have to ask the question, so if you are in that meeting at Facebook or wherever, you and things are being discussed, whoever you are that might be listening to this podcast, you have to bring it up. You have to say, okay, question, are we still on a side of the ethics line that we want to be on? And talk about being aware and conscious. Can we stop and make a conscious, aware decision about whether this particular campaign or plan or design is can stay on an ethical line for the team.
Well, Facebook made $2.2 billion in profit last quarter.
I know.
So...
ethics and money don't. No, absolutely. I was listening to a report right before we got on to do this call about the fact that Facebook is making a ton of money and Twitter might be going the way of Yahoo, and that as a tech company, you have to be able to say what you are about and how you're going to make money being about that thing. And Facebook has definitely figured out how to make money. But I'm also fascinated, Natalie, about you said you're not on Facebook anymore, so. And Guthrie, you mentioned, Telegram and nonprofit, right? So, it is, I guess we'll have to save for another conversation about, the profitability of this. Can you behave ethically and still make money? Which perhaps is
or conversely, can you not make money and still behave unethically? Recently, no, I only bring it up because recently a Swedish firm got the contract from the United States government to build the data hub, and all internet traffic in North America will run through a government hub. That will.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so so the government will have records of all data that runs through North America.
Because that's not frightening or surveillance or,
I'm
breach
sure
of any of
fine.
your rights.
Right. So it's all, you got to put these things these companies are doing in perspective, because the real true data mining that's happening at a massive level is happening on the governmental level.
Oh, well, on that bright, optimistic, happy note, I probably have to bring this to an end. But before we bring this to an end, Natalie, you just finished writing a second edition of one of your books. You want to tell us what the book is, by the way?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for asking. I'd completely forgotten about that with our fantastic conversation. So it's called Webs of Influence, The Psychology of Online Persuasion. The original edition came out in 2012. The new edition will be coming out in April of next year, so April 2017. What I thought would be a bunch of light revises has ended up in a full rewriting of 2/3 of the entire book.
Oh my gosh!
Oh God, I know. I completely I miscalculated the amount of effort that would have to go into it. But it's there's a lot of really interesting research that's come out since. So that's that.
And what else are you? Anything else
plug
you're
some
working
more
on?
Stuff.
You want to tell us about?
Plug away.
Well, sure. But it's not really so much mine. But so the other thing that I've been working on recently is a fantastic podcast with The Guardian on the science of emotion, which I think your listeners might be interested in because it's around psychology and science and emotions and how we live our lives. And that's completely for free, and you can just find that. I think that'll be coming out in August, September time. So
what does it have a name?
I I think it's just going to be the science of emotion, but if you Google Guardian and my name, it will probably come up.
All right.
Not fun.
And I want to thank you so much for coming on, and we'll let you like process how the experience was, and then we might bug you and ask you to come on again.
Oh, it'll be such a pleasure. It's always really fascinating talking with you. Thanks, Susan, for bringing me on. Thanks, Guthrie. It's been nice chatting with you both.
Oh man, so much fun. Twitter handles again.
Susan, after you, my darling.
The Brain Lady.
And she tweets amazing stuff, so it's well worth following. And I'm just at Nathalie Nahai.
Cool. If you have any questions or anything, you can email us, me, whomever, at info@theteamw.com. You can just also go to theteamw.com for various other fun stuff about us and what we do. And with that, I'd just like to thank you both so much for hanging out and chit-chatting. And I hope our audience has a really great weekend. So I'll talk to you all soon.
Bye.
Bye.